And joining us now to debate the happiness gender gap. In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Betsey Stevenson, Assistant Professor of Business and Public Policy at the Wharton School. And here in studio, Margaret Wente, columnist with the Globe and Mail. Kathy Buckworth, author of The Blackberry Diaries, Adventures in Modern Motherhood. And Ann Kingston, senior writer with Maclean's Magazine. And a reminder, this being a Your Agenda Thursday program, we'd like to involve you in the discussion, so you can reach us on Twitter at twitter.com/theagenda or by email at theagenda@tvo.org. Lots of discussion on this topic, so please jump in and join the debate. We also want to remind you that tonight, fifth column blogger Mike Miner is hosting a live chat on our Inside Agenda blog. You can find that on our website at tvo.org/theagenda. So again, log on, let us and your fellow viewers know what you think. Now, as I welcome everybody here, and Betsey, to you in Pennsylvania, let me set up the program this way. Tonight's program comes on the heels of several studies, Betsey's done one of them, that suggest women are less and less happy these days. And let's start with just some of the responses that we got online when we put this out for suggestion. Why women are unhappy? See Bill Clinton's quote, this person says. Women do 66% of the world's work, but they produce 10% of the world's income and own only 1% of the world's property. And we got one more. With the strides women have made over the last 40 years, their increasing unhappiness is indeed perplexing. Could it be that the world they have entered is not as fulfilling as they thought it would be? The pace of life for two working parents is more than frantic. Being from an older generation, I don't know how they do it. My good old days bias tells me this way of life cannot be optimal for children and couples, and I think at some level women are feeling this. So thanks to everybody for opining on this. Our Thursday programs are very much motivated by the emails we get from people. Those are the feedback we want to share with you tonight. Let's look at some of the stats now. According to the long-range U.S. General Social Survey, women today are unhappier than they were 35 years ago when compared to men. Let's bring this graphic up, Michael, and we'll show you. Look at the direction the two lines are going in. Scale of 1 to 3, 3 being very happy, 1 being not too happy. The women's line, the red line, is trending down, and the other one is trending up. And even women are getting unhappier as they age, with the opposite occurring for men. Okay, Betsey, you co-authored the study called The Paradox of Declining Women's Happiness. Do you have enough confidence, for starters, that you have a big enough universe tested to say that what we've got here is a trend?
So that's a great question. And in fact, what we did was used every available data set that has asked people questions about their happiness, their life satisfaction, other questions of subjective well-being over the last 35 years. And we analyzed all of those data sets, from the General Social Survey to monitoring the future, a survey of youth, to even the Virginia Slims poll. And I think we're the first economists to have dug out this series of questionnaires that was paid for by Virginia Slims that asked both men and women, a representative sample of men and women, about their welfare, about their life satisfaction. And what we found in all of these data sets was the same finding. Women became less happy from the 70s through to today, and became less happy both absolutely and relative to that of what men were saying.
Margaret Wente, do these findings jibe with your reality? I don't mean you personally, I mean your
my
world.
reality.
Well, with your world, with what you and your fellow women discuss.
Well, I don't know. I think I can say that in spite of the fact that I know lots of women who have almost all. They're accomplished career women, they're happy mothers, they're happily married. They seem to be able to do it all, but are they happier than their grandmothers and their mothers were? Or am I happier than my mother and my grandmother were? You know, I can't really say yes.
You cannot say yes?
I cannot really say yes.
Why not?
Because I've been thinking about this a lot, but maybe it's a function of rising expectations. Our expectations of ourselves and of society are so much higher than our grandmothers were that maybe the world can't possibly meet everything that we're demanding of it, or that we're demanding of ourselves.
Anne Kingston, what do you say?
I agree with Peggy's point about rising expectations, and I found what was interesting in the study that it did discuss that notion that women had so many different, planes of existence than was the case in 1972. But I also find it interesting talking about mothers and grandmothers, bringing up the whole idea of happiness and to what extent happiness was a marker of personal worth, fulfillment. I think that it probably wouldn't have been as important. I mean, A, they wouldn't have been asked the question to begin with, and B, I don't know that happiness, it seems to me to be very modern and very elusive, and almost I think one of the questions that has to be raised is, to what extent is happiness even something that's pin downable?
I'm going to follow up on that in a second. I've read your books, Kathy, so I know how nuts your life is. So do these findings jibe with your understanding of where women are at today?
Yeah, I think so, and I think so because I'm going to build on what Anne said about the planes of existence. It's not just that we feel that we want to be happy. We're having other people tell us what happiness is. So we're supposed to be having this great house that anyone at Home and House and Gardens would show. We're supposed to be beautiful. We're supposed to be in shape. We're supposed to be feeding our kids the most nutritious meals. We're supposed to be working full time. Every single facet of our lives has been raised to this level. I mean, show me one part of any woman's life where we're lowering the bar, right, as we sit here today. So I think what's happened is not only were we supposed to be happy at home, as maybe our moms or our grandmas were. Now we're supposed to be happy, not even just doing it, but happy with everything else that we're doing. We're lucky if we're just doing it, let alone, reaching the happiness bar.
And you and your friends, are you meeting that expectation more often than not?
Well, as we say happy, what's happy? Happy is, the fact that you get through the end of the day and you've actually managed to still have the same number of kids that you started at the start of the day with. The house isn't any messier than when you started the beginning of the day. I'm all about lowering the bar here.
I was going to say, the bar's pretty low if all you got to do is make sure you got the same number of kids at the end of the day as at the beginning. It's a start. Okay, Betsey, let's put Anne Kingston's question to you, which is a pretty good one, I think, and that is, can you even measure this kind of thing?
Right, so that's a great question. And actually, I just wanted to say on the facts, some of these surveys do exist from the 40s. What we wanted to analyze was continuous surveys, and so the earliest we can go back is the 1972 start of the General Social Survey, because you want to analyze a question that's been asked in the same way over time in order to see changes in how people have answered it. But in terms of can you ask people about happiness, that's something psychologists have actually been studying for decades. And what they have shown in the lab is that it's correlated, people's answers to these subjective questions about life satisfaction and happiness are correlated with more objective measures of happiness. So first of all, it's correlated with the type of outcomes we would expect. Wealthier people report being happier. People, when they experience a loss, a death in the family, we see that their reported happiness goes down. But psychologists have also do more fancy tests where they go in and they look at brain waves and brain scans, and they say, well, this is a happy person based on, say, brain scan data or eye movement data or the measurement of genuine smiles. They also do things like test, retest correlation, asking people the same question over time to see if they give consistent answers. They've even done things where they bring people in who know you and ask them, how happy do you think this person is? And we find that the answers are correlated. So we certainly think that these measures of subjective well-being are capturing something that's very important that does tell us something about our welfare. But I would agree that we need the caveat that perhaps it's not the whole enchilada. It might not be all of our welfare. And maybe there's something bigger in life like fulfillment that's not being captured by happiness.
Peggy, you said something in your answer that really struck me, and that is you said you knew people who were happily married, happily mothering, and happy in their careers. I'm tempted to say name names, because that is a trifecta that I think that's damn near impossible to find these days, isn't it?
Well, I'm talking generally speaking, and from the outside, they're doing okay. They're not broke, they're not in jail, their kids aren't in jail.
Oh, again, we're lowering the bar quite a bit here.
But look at how high the bar is.
Yeah.
50 years ago, 60 years ago, here was the bar. You had to be a good wife, keep a nice house, didn't have to be that large a house. Your kids had to behave, had to be presentable, and that was about it. You didn't have to look like Angelina Jolie when you were 50.
Do you now?
Well, the pressure's there. Absolutely the pressure is there.
It is.
Absolutely. You're not allowed to grow old today. my grandma was allowed to grow old. She was allowed to have gray hair. I don't, but...
Who doesn't let you grow old gracefully today? Really?
Well,
Who's saying
yes.
you can't?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a good question. But now we not only have house and home and being a good wife and being a good cook, but okay, we've got the forever young. We've got have to perform on the job, compete with guys for the next promotion, compete with Mother Teresa to be a good person in society and philanthropic. So the areas in which we have to compete to be good, to be either good, to be good or successful, have doubled. So self-critical as we are, we can always find fault with ourselves, and there's always a lot of fault to find.
And the one area that you did touch on, which I think has grown too, is the kids. Before, when we were kids, we were allowed to go out and play, like kick the can, come in when the streetlights came on. Now, if you don't have your kid in select hockey, if you don't have them, in after-school programs every day of the week, you're doing something wrong.
Then it's child abuse.
And it's child abuse. Well, my daughter recently, I made the select hockey team, and my first impression was to not let her do it. But then if I don't let her do it, then I'm a bad mom because I'm not giving her the opportunity to do it. So the very fact that it exists means that if she gets into it, I've got a decision to make
Can I
right
just
away.
understand it? I thought it was the dads who were very competitive about their sons being in a ton of sports, but
Oh, I
apparently
think it's
mothers and daughters do this as
well.
well?
It's the next. No, I don't go to hockey games. I just like to complain about them. So, but it's that
You're on
whole
your BlackBerry hockey
expectation.
games.
It's the whole expectation that you have to put your child in all these activities. My 7-year-old son, in fact, when I said, "What sports do you want to do this year?" he said, "None," and I said, "I'm in." So he's actually not doing anything. So that's probably going to be a great source of ostracization for him at school.
And a source of shame for you among
Source
your
of
friends?
shame, not at
Yeah.
all.
And where are you coming from?
Well, I'm thinking about all of these pressures that are put on women, that, being Angelina Jolie at 50, and where does that come from? That comes from, well, the media, as well as advertising, which is something that, we talked, what struck me interestingly at the beginning when we were talking about feminism and the fact that this has all happened since 1972, which was, Feminine Mystique was written in 1963, but published in 63, but feminism brought with it a huge marketing opportunity, which has been realized in it just profoundly. That whole, the precept of you can have it all, not feminist marketing, and feminists have been absolutely tarred with that ridiculous kind of mandate. And I think it's seeped into everything from the professionalism of motherhood, that the pressures that go on women in every single avenue. If you look at it through the advertiser's lens, it's absurd, and that if you bend to it, then of course you're going to be unhappy. You're going to be miserable.
Maureen Dad wrote something about this, I guess, just a few days ago in the New York Times. Let's read a little snippet of this and then come back and talk about it. Michael, if you would, this excerpt. In the early 1970s, she wrote, breaking out of the domestic cocoon, leaving their mothers' circumscribed lives behind, young women felt exhilarated and bold. But the more women have achieved, the more they seem aggrieved. Did the feminist revolution end up benefiting men more than women? Betsey, how do you answer the question?
Well, I think that's certainly something that's possible, and we can't reject that or confirm that from our data. The one thing that does point in that direction is the fact that women have become less satisfied with their household's financial situation over time, and men have not. And that might be because women are now taking a greater responsibility in managing household finances. They're more responsible for making sure that there's food on the table, and perhaps they don't feel that they've given up responsibility in other domains. If that's the case, then certainly that would be something that would be benefiting men. Men are less responsible now to be the provider, but perhaps haven't taken on an equivalent responsibility in the home.
Okay, and then Kathy.
Okay, what's interesting is there was a study that came out earlier in the spring, and I'm absolutely blanking out. Well-known economist, Betsey probably knows his name.
Male or female?
Male, man, who has published a finding that said that one of the reasons that men are happier is, or what one of his sort of conclusions was, that with time, men have reduced the number of things in their life that they don't like to do, and and that may be, they're more hobbies, less work, whereas women have added to their, whether it be work, whether it be, managing hockey schedules, whether it be, contributing to the income, managing parents, the burden has increased, whereas men, quite smartly, are doing less of what they don't want and more of what they do want. Perhaps that's a recipe for happiness.
I think also...
So this is a study by...
Go ahead, let's hear Kathy and then Betsey.
So I was going to say, I think also on the side of that where men have taken on more of the household responsibilities, I say they haven't really taken it on unless they've taken on the guilt that goes with it. And I think men like checking things off lists. So if you're saying to them, you need to do this, this, and this today, and they can check it off, they feel like they've done a really good job and they get validated for it. I have friends who say, oh, my husband, he's so good, he does the laundry. I haven't heard a man say that about his wife. Ever. So I mean, they're getting validation for doing the most simple of household chores. They get to check it off and say, I'm a new man, I'm doing everything. Whereas we haven't really given anything up because we're still giving them the list to begin with.
That's the expectation.
That's the expectation.
Is still there. Okay, Betsey, come on in.
Yeah, I was going to say that study is a study by Alan Kruger, and what he did was he looked at how people spend their time, and then he looked at how much they enjoy the activities that they're doing. And what he found was something very consistent to what we found in the happiness and life satisfaction questions, which is that there's been a growing gap with women spending more of their time doing things that they don't like doing, and men spending more of their time doing things that they do like doing. And what was really striking about that study is sometimes it's the exact same activity, it's just men and women like it differently. And one of the things he found, I believe, was that men enjoy spending time with their parents more than women do. And one possible explanation for that is a guy's idea of spending time with his parents is sitting down drinking a beer watching the game with his dad, and the wife's idea of spending time with her parents is making sure that they're going to their doctor's appointments or their bills are getting paid or that their needs are being met.
I have a completely unfounded theory, but let me test this out on you, that women are still responsible, and it is largely of our own choosing. This is largely of our own choosing. So that makes me think that there is something about the way we are wired differently from men. We still carry the primary responsibility for the emotional heavy lifting, let's say that.
Which includes what?
Making sure your folks are okay.
Remembering birthdays.
Yeah, remembering birthdays. Making sure your husband phones his mom on her birthday, stuff like that. And we can assign it to our husbands, and they're often very good at it. They're spending more time with the kids and all of that. But we cannot release ourselves from that burden. And I have a feeling that even if we had husbands, some of us do have husbands, who would actually take on that nurturing and connecting and emotional heavy lifting stuff, we wouldn't give it up. We wouldn't want to give it up because it's so integral to what we feel we've got to do as women.
Kathy, we just had an email come up on the screen that suggested that maybe men are happier than women because of the financial splits now. More women are working, they're bringing more money into the home. Men feel less oppressed in the past to be the providers, if you like, to be the 100% breadwinners and providers. Does that make sense to you?
That does make sense to me, actually. I think that's a fair point. I think in a lot of households that's been the case, where that traditionally, if that were their role and they were to lose that role, especially in the economy today, that was a huge source of unhappiness for men, where I think, yeah, today, if they can share that burden, I guess, of providing for the household, I think that makes a lot of sense.
What do you think about the DNA argument here? You folks are hardwired to do it that way.
To do the work around the house?
Well, to be the, how did you put it?
To
the emotional support.
Well, I think
I'm
not going to argue biology, but I do think that there is a no, I'm not. But there is a holdover from the Victorian era where a woman's power was in the sort of the personal domain and a man's was public. And I think that we wouldn't be doing this. Women still do the lion's share of household work. We know this. Year after year, StatsCan comes out and tells us the same thing.
Well, actually, I'm not sure that's true, because I know I've read some other studies that say it's really become much more equal.
Oh, it's becoming more
Much
equal,
more
but
equal.
we still have. There's so many cases of women who say, "I do it because I choose to," because they like the way they do it. They don't want to have pink socks.
So whose fault is that?
That's not anybody's fault.
It's
It's a
well, it's the
choice.
women
Why don't we
who
just
say,
settle for pink socks?
Well, and I do. Actually, I go buy new socks is what I do. But I think what happens too is we are still doing the assigning, right? In terms of you do this and I'll do that. I'm connected on Twitter with a whole bunch of moms who tweet out all their complaints all the time. And one of them said, would you ever let your husband do the laundry? And I thought, oh, I'm so disturbed by even seeing that. Would you ever let your husband do the laundry? And then more disturbing, most of the women came back and said no.
And they said no because?
They said no because they won't do it right.
But that comes back to the whole idea of the power within the personal domain, and you don't want to give it up and have someone maybe not achieve the standards that you.
My husband took over laundry a year ago. I have been at Walmart every week since then buying my kids new socks and underwear because it's never done.
I agree with both of you.
I'm not doing the laundry again. again.
The classic example is, honey, can you do the grocery shopping? And he says, yeah, just give me the list.
Give me the list. And then they won't shop off the list, and then they come home, put it on the table, and you're
Right.
still responsible for everything else that goes in. Sorry,
Betsey,
we're getting to a bit of bashing.
Yeah, I can. Betsey, you want to help us out on this one?
Well, what we know from the data is that men and women are working similar numbers of hours. Women do more work in the home, but that's because they do less work in the marketplace. But the total number of hours when we add home production and market production, men and women have both had a decrease in the number of hours they're working over time. But we can't. Everything that's being said is not something we capture in time use surveys, which is who's bearing the emotional responsibility for that work. And I think that's a really open question because it's not something we can easily capture on a survey.
And is it your experience that as men and women get older, the men get happier and the women get unhappier?
I can only speak for myself, and I'm getting happier as I get older, but nobody's polled me on any of this. I think that, going back to the Maureen Dowd column that we referenced earlier, it's this notion, I think, that men can, men remain vital and viable and, viable real estate on the market into later in age than women do. And I think, for whatever reason, that's a cultural perception. And I think there's truth in it. But I don't know. I think the study, Betsey's study, indicated that, with age, came unhappiness, which is obviously a function of life and, the various problems and conflicts that occur. But I do think that getting older for women involves the sorts of issues that we've been talking about in terms of burden and increasingly taking care of parents or, shouldering a lot of the, household issues. That's a generalization, but it's something I've observed.
Peggy?
But there's another fact, and this is cruelly unfair, but it's just, again, biology. As you age, there are a lot more women. The men-women ratio changes, and there are a lot more women on the market than there are men. So if you're a guy, if you're a 70-year-old guy, you have women lined up to give you casseroles at the door. If you're a woman, that's not the case.
Doesn't work that way.
So there's an inequity just built into that.
Go ahead, Betsey.
I was just going to say, it's also a little bit even more mechanical than that, which is that people who die tend to be people who are unhealthy and perhaps not that happy. And so what happens is that as we age, we kill off more of the unhappy men, and those unhappy women keep living.
Okay.
Too bad for us. Yeah.
So, Kathy, Botox, was that the greatest invention of all time or the worst invention of all time?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I have mixed feelings on that. I certainly have friends that do it, and they
what
think
age?
it's. Actually, I've known people in their 20s who have done it. I've
are
known
they
women
doing?
much older than that. I think, they're trying it on, and I think what's great about something like that is it's something that you can try, and it doesn't have hopefully lasting effects. But I'm not sure if it's the greatest message, of course, because it makes you younger. Maybe emotionless is a good thing women could do with losing a little bit of emotion. But I'm not sure about the long-term sort of effects of someone being totally addicted to having to look a certain way.
Okay, I'm going to ask a real stupid question here.
Sure.
Why does somebody in their 20s want to inject poison into their forehead?
Well, actually, you can put Botox around your lips and give you puffier lips, apparently. So that's what they're doing it for.
Is that right?
Yes.
And this is a good look?
Apparently, yes.
Kind of look like a duck.
Yes, I'm not sure that I get it, but apparently so.
The stuff I learn on this program. Okay, let's talk about the second shift. This is something you've all heard of, no doubt. The first shift is doing your job outside the home, and then when that's done, you come home and the second shift is on, all the housework. How much, okay, Betsey, you first. How much help, if I can put it that way, do women get on the second shift from their male partners?
Well, as I said before, what we see is that the number of hours that men and women work are roughly the same. When we add number of hours, in the labor force plus the number of hours at home, obviously those are averages. So there's differences. There are some women who are putting in a lot more hours than their husbands are, and there's some women who are putting in less. But on average, what we see is that men and women are working the same number of hours. Now we do
what does
see
that
that
mean?
men
When
tend
you
to
say
put in
working the same number of hours, do you mean inside and outside the home?
inside and outside. And so what a lot of that actually does come from the fact that sometimes what you'll have is, a man who's working 55 hours a week at his job, a woman who's working 40 hours a week at her job, and then coming home and doing the 15 hours a week around the house. And so that when we look at the time use surveys, that looks equal, but perhaps it's not equal by choice, perhaps it's not equal by preferences. You know, that becomes harder to know.
Okay, Peggy, let's take those hours. If a man is doing 55 all outside the home, a woman is doing 40 outside the home and 15 at home, is that equality?
Well, it's a certain kind of equality. For example, the amount of household work that everybody's doing has gone way down. Women are doing way less household work than they used to. I mean, we're farming a lot, we're contracting a lot of it out. Women don't cook anymore, families don't cook anymore as much as they used to. They buy meals on the way home. They have dishwashers, they've got microwave ovens, some people have cleaning ladies. Most people have cleaning ladies that I know. Some people have nannies. So a lot of that has been outsourced. Is it fair that women still have to do more of the, unglamorous scut work?
The grunt work.
The toilet scrubbing stuff? I don't know. It just is, though. It just is.
Kathy?
Well, I wonder how those hours, are they self-reported by the men in terms of, if you took out the hours when they spent straightening the garage, maybe, it would be a little bit less.
Well, does golfing,
Yeah,
count as part of the 55?
And
taking
again,
clients out for golfing?
And the guilt associated, we talked about this already, the guilt associated with who owns the task to begin with and who's being told to do it. The most frustrating world, and the thing my husband does, is stand in front of me and say, what would you like me to do now? Why am I the boss of that? Why do I own that? So the study doesn't really talk to that. Well, it does a bit to the emotional ownership of those tasks.
But your husband still expects that you will be responsible for not only the maintenance of the house, but assigning tasks to him.
Yeah, but he's afraid of me. So I think that's why, no, I'm joking. But I think that's why, in a sense, that, no, I think that's true in a lot of homes, actually, in terms of what are the priorities of the home. The woman is more likely to know what the priorities of the home are. Maybe I'm stereotyping, but amongst the friends that I have, I think we're more likely to know what needs to be done first.
Anne?
Well, I think that's probably true, but I think that going to the question of fairness, I was just thinking there's a study that came out, StatsCan, talked about income, and increasingly women are earning more money than their husbands. And what happens in those cases where women earn more money, the study found, they determined who cleaned the house. And usually it meant bringing somebody else in. Whereas when men earned more, the woman, even if the woman was out working outside of the house, she'd continue to clean the house. And I do think that there's an equity in there. And I think that it stems from something that's a really big question, probably too, it's a show into itself. And that has to do with the fact that the structures feminism and the, advances of feminism did not bring the structural change that, happened when the wife left the house to go out into the workplace. There still remained the need for the wife within the home. And that, what we've seen in the ensuing, half century is an attempt to achieve that equilibrium without changing basic structures, that a world that assumes that there will be domestic support.
But Betsey, tell me this, are women, again, taking your example where the man might do 55 hours all outside the home, the woman 40 hours outside the home and 15 inside, is she bitter about having to be overwhelmingly responsible for the upkeep of that home?
Well, I don't actually know the answer to that question. I mean, it's certainly, one explanation for why women could be getting less happy. They feel pressured to be successful on all these fronts. This is something that's come up. That lots of people, we've already brought up. That women feel pressure to be successful on lots of fronts. And I meant to say that we actually see that exact idea in the answers of the questions from teenagers. Unfortunately, adults aren't asked about this in any of the surveys I've looked at, but the teenage girls were asked to rank or to rate how important different domains were to them. And what they've told us over the last 35 years is everything's become more important. Being a leader in their community, contributing to the community, being successful in their career, having a successful family, taking care of their family, all of these things have become more important to them. And then when the teenage girls are asked what areas are, about satisfaction in their lives in different areas, what they tell us is that what they've become less satisfied with over the last 35 years is time for themselves, just having fun, time for leisure. And I think that really echoes what I'm hearing, everyone say about the pressure that women are under. And we're hearing this even from 17-year-old girls.
Peggy, it sounds like you folks should be in the lowering of expectations business, and I wonder how you do that.
I think that's a really good idea.
Well, how do you do it?
That's a really, really good idea because, we're not talking so much here about the flaws of men. We could talk forever about the flaws of men, but okay, let's put that
It's an hour
aside.
show, Peggy.
The
It's an hour
fact
show.
is, right, The fact is that we've outsourced a lot of the housework. We have outsourced the vast majority of the horrible housework that people used to do. You know, we don't have to put clothes through the mangle anymore. We don't have to beat them on rocks. I think part of what has happened here is something that Anne alluded to, which is the ratcheting up of the competitive, go-go consumer society, where expectations are completely unrealistic, especially expectations about maybe what it means to lead a fulfilled, contented, and happy life. We're bombarded not only with consumer messages, but with self-help messages. I mean, look at go in the bookstore and look at the racks of self-help books there, all of which, by the way, are consumed by women, except for the books about how to improve your golf game. But books and magazines and Oprah all over the place from the time we were teenagers, we're bombarded with messages about how to improve, how to get better, how to perfect your find spiritual happiness. And we're told that if only we live the right way or do the right things, we will find inner peace and fulfillment.
And did you buy it?
Well, no.
I can tell. Go ahead, Anne.
Well, what was interesting, and one of the really fascinating nuggets in Betsey's study was a reference to the Virginia Slims poll. In it, I think women were asked about choice and whether choice was a good thing, and 72% said yes, choice is a good thing, and 13 or whomever said no, it wasn't. And I was thinking about that, and I'm wondering, I think we overvalue choice, and I mean it speaks to the whole idea of the multifaceted, having a full and complex life being valued. I think that you only have to go to IKEA or the supermarket to know that choice is not necessarily a great thing, and it can be a form of tyranny. And that the idea that we have to succeed in so many different, avenues, and that the pressure that comes with that, and the idea that going back to the whole Martha Stewart, ideal of the house, that you could spend, buying the perfect thing has become, something that drives people, and it's absolutely absurd. But going back to the idea, do we overvalue choice in our society? And I think that number that everybody just reflexively said, yes, choice is a good thing, it struck me as kind of a fascinating lens into the whole question.
Let me look through that lens at your life, if I can, for a second, Kat. You have 4 children. You're writing books, you're writing magazine articles, you're traveling, I think, promoting a book right now, so you've got the overwhelming, I think, responsibility for your 4 children to make sure they're in school, in programs after school, all of that. With all of that responsibility, does there come a kind of, I don't want to overdo this, but I mean bitterness about whether your husband carries an equal load?
Yeah, and he does carry an equal load, most of those things. So I wouldn't say that that's my main sort of issue with having to do all of the after-school things or trying to fulfill everything at home. I do have a cleaning lady. I use internet grocery shopping. I have a dry cleaner come to my door. I have contracted out every single possible thing that I can contract out because I work mostly full-time, as does my husband. But I would say, again, building on what Anne had said about choice, while we have the minutia of choice available to us in terms of what's the perfect vase for the home, what's the right paint color, what's the in kind of fabric to have on your couch. We don't have a choice per se to say, I don't care about that kind of stuff. I don't care if my house doesn't look like it comes out of, a magazine. I don't care if I need to lose the last 10 pounds. We're supposed to care about those things, and we're supposed to meet those expectations. So I would argue we actually have less choice in a lot of parts of our lives because the choice to do it or not do it sometimes isn't there.
Betsey, I want to ask you about an email that just popped up on our screen here, and that is, how happy are couples when they don't have children?
So what we see in the data very clearly is that couples without children are happier than couples with children as individuals, not necessarily happier with their marriage. But when we look at people's life satisfaction or their happiness, we see that people, both men and women, with kids are less happy, less satisfied than people without kids who are equivalent to them. So it does seem that kids is not a good thing for people's reported happiness.
Let's do a little case study here, because Kathy, you got 4 kids, and Peggy Wente, you don't have any.
Kathy, thank you for having my children.
You're welcome. And
between
someone
the two of you,
else's
you've got
too.
4
Yeah.
kids.
Do you want them back?
It's okay.
It's okay.
It's perhaps it's impossible to ask, can you imagine your life with children and how it would be different? But in your universe, are couples happier if they don't have kids than if they do?
Well, there was this myth that was very prevalent for a while that childless women were doomed to unhappiness. And I actually bought into this for a while, and I was very sad for about 6 months, when I didn't have children. But then I noticed that I would get together with my childless friends, girlfriends, once we'd reached a certain age and we were past all that, and we'd sit around drinking wine. I would ask them, well, are you sorry you didn't have children? Are you miserable? Is your life ruined, secretly ruined because you didn't have children? And they would say, are you kidding?
So they're okay?
They're fine, yeah. They're just great.
Okay, this is a really unfair question, but do you ever imagine your life without those 4 kids and whether it might be better?
Well, it's funny, when you are without them, I have been traveling, and when they aren't at home, it's too quiet. I don't know what to do with myself. And then I think, I should be doing all those things I'm supposed to be doing, like exercising or, painting the living room or doing whatever. So sometimes having kids is a great excuse to not really hit all of the other great expectations you're supposed to hit. My house is a mess and I have an excuse, so.
Betsey, this is a real good time to ask you this question, because you just had a kid 3 weeks ago. And actually,
Right.
you know what? It's almost 20 to 9 and you're still awake. I'm quite amazed. You're doing a great job this evening. But how about it? Life without kids versus with kids. You happier now that you got one?
We're really enjoying having a child, and I think it was a great thing for me and a great thing for us as a couple. But I will say that there are moments where I really wonder how I would have done if I didn't have a partner that was really doing 50%. Because when she's, nonstop crying, when I'm, sick of it, I have someone I can hand her to. And he is, willing to take on his share. And what I saw just in the hospital when I was giving birth was an absence of men around. And I really wondered how women do it when they don't have, really co-parenting partners.
How long do you expect that phase to last in your man?
I expect it to last. And certainly we've set up a set of norms in the household where it's supposed to last. I will admit, I have actually only changed a diaper once or twice at this point.
Awesome.
Okay. And you are like Peggy, without children.
I'm without children. In fact, I wrote about this very subject a few weeks ago, and it's a very contentious issue. But I wrote about the number of people who are actively choosing not to have children. And there is an emerging literature on this topic, and it speaks to, I think, what Betsey was saying, that not only are individuals within marriages happier, but they're looking at marriages now that people have been able to make that choice over almost 2 generations, that marriages tend to be stronger in childless situations, which is an interesting something that might be counter intuitive. But on the other hand, when you hear stories about fear of inequality and the tensions that can arise because of children, not as surprising.
In your universe, the people who don't have children, is the preponderance because, oh darn, I waited too late and now it is too late? Or is it oh my goodness, I forgot to have kids? Or is it, we chose not to?
I think it's we chose not to. That's my own experience. I think that and increasingly people feel that women can say without feeling that they're unnatural or somehow, minus biological clockwork, that this is an active choice that they have made for themselves. I think there still is stigma around not choosing to have a child, that there's something selfish about you or wrong with you. There is that judgment. Certainly we heard it from Maclean's readers after the story ran. But I do think that that the people I know in my universe who don't have kids did it quite consciously.
Peggy.
I also want to
One second, Betsey.
in on that.
Betsey, hang on 1 second. Well, Peggy, and then to you.
That's a much more popular choice among professional women, like Anne and me. Large number of professional women with careers who think of themselves as having careers are choosing to pass up the children thing because it's, maybe they see the complications and they know it's not going to be easy to do both, which it certainly isn't. But I see one positive here, and that is that the younger men I work with are very different. They're very, very different from the men, even of our generation. The guys in their 30s, who are, many of them are fathers of young families. They're very different. They're
in what respect?
Way more involved as parents. They take paternity leave. They have to leave the office at 5 o'clock to pick up the kid at daycare. They're much, much more involved with the nitty-gritty of child rearing.
And do they like that?
They do.
They do?
Yes,
They don't wish they had it like their dads did?
No, they just think it's part of what they do. It's part of the way it is, yeah.
Betsey, come on in.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I really want to defend waiting as an active choice, even though it reduces your probability. So this used to drive me crazy because I'm a 38-year-old who just had my first child. And all through my 30s, people would say to me, well, you're focusing on your career now, but it's going to be too late. And I said, look, it's my choice. This is what I want. I want to focus on my career. And if that means I'm not going to have children, that's my choice. And so it's okay to make a choice that's probabilistic. And I don't think women should feel guilty about that or feel like they made a mistake or they waited too long. They make a choice. It's probabilistic. If they can't have children when they want to have them in their late 30s, then that's the choice they made.
That's a hell of a gamble, though, isn't it? I mean, most women I
Not
talk to...
necessarily.
No, the only reason I say it is that most women I talk to say they can, the most important, and this is whether they've got careers or not. If they have children, they say having those children, raising those children, being a mother is the most fulfilling, most amazing, most incredible, most fantastic thing they could do in their lives. And if they'd waited too long to do it and it didn't happen, you know, there would have been a certain, their lives, the meaning of their lives would have been significantly less.
Well, you know, I come back to the data that says that people with kids aren't happier, and in fact, they're less happy. And, you know, certainly for me, I didn't want to have children at a younger age. And I think women should, you know, they need to think about the consequences. You're absolutely right. For some women, that is a trade-off they don't want to make or a risk they don't want to take. But for other women, it is a risk they want to take, because I would say that having my life without my career, I wouldn't want that life either.
Anne?
I think it's an interesting, that whole question speaks to the idea of happiness and fulfillment, and whether, you know, women who make that, who are that avid in making that claim, that's one portion of women. This is why all of these discussions about what women want and what, you know, what makes women happy, we're very differentiated. Women are not, you know, and not all women feel the same way about children. There are women who choose not, I'm one of them, who never thought that she would have children, and I'm very comfortable with that choice. And I also know that there's a lot of pressure on women to, you know, because they're missing out on the greatest thing that life can offer. So it's a very difficult sort of conundrum, but I'm absolutely with Betsey. I think you cannot be pressured into this, and that these choices are important choices rather than all of these artificial pretend choices that we have out there.
So, okay, so sorry for this very personal question here, but you're one of those who does not feel that because I didn't have a kid, I missed out on potentially the greatest life-altering, most amazing experience ever?
Well, I think that's sort of this huge existential, you know, question that hangs over me, because I'm aware that that is a fact. But I am, you know, I'm willing to live my life without, you know, succumbing to depression that's, you know, that maybe that was not the choice for me. So in answer to your question, I'm okay with it.
I'm okay, you're okay.
Great.
And honestly, once we've had the kids, we pretty well have to say it was the best thing that we've ever done. I mean, honestly,
There's no going back, is there?
and also once you've had them, you can't go back to the person you were before you had them. So it's sort of an unfair comparison to say, you know, if I hadn't had them, blah, blah, blah. Well, it doesn't matter. You had them. Like, full stop on that sentence right there. It's like the book that came out recently, 40 Reasons Not to Have Children, which was written by a woman who had 2 children, in fact. And a lot of my, you know, my friends, we read it, and we said, 40? I mean, I can give you a million reasons not to have kids. I can give you a million reasons to have them as well, too. So,
what was
I mean,
number 1 on the list?
I don't actually remember. Probably you're happier. I don't know. Yeah.
Margaret, given how multitasking, multi-talented, high expectations, the kinds of lives women are leading today, do you think there is an expectation that women ought to be happier than men, which is not, according to these studies, the way it is?
Why should we be happier? Why should we be happier than men?
We should be.
Because the
think so?
the richness of your lives is more than men can expect.
Maybe. Well, you know, I sort of tend to think the opposite. If men are emotionally less complicated than women, maybe that's why they're happier than we are. We are emotionally complicated. The world is a very complex place, far more complex for women than it ever has been before. And maybe we just internalize all that stress, and maybe men externalize it. And maybe there is biological, you know, neurocognitive difference in the way that men and women handle complexity and stress. Maybe they just get it all out there, and maybe we just swallow it all and it's all in here.
And
I think it's not a coincidence that you have four women and you sitting around talking about this evening. I don't see any other, men sitting on the panel
You
discussing
know why?
this.
You want to know why?
Well,
It's not for lack of effort.
oh, I
Our
believe you.
producers tried to book some men tonight, and guess what? They're all too chicken to come
No,
on and
I
talk
did.
about
I
this
did
with you.
an informal, a completely unscientific poll today at work where I talked to men and women and just said, "Are you happy?" The men kind of thought about it, said, "Yeah," and wanted to talk about something else or just buzzed off. Women, on the other hand, thought about it, pondered it, said, "Well, let me think." I'm happy about this aspect of my life, not that, and then wanted to know why I was asking the question. And that, to me, sort of absolutely in a snapshot showed the difference.
Absolutely right. We're too introspective. We think too much about these things.
We
Men,
overthink
men, we overthink it. Men don't think about it very much at all.
Beer in a ball game, Peggy. Beer in a ball game.
Yeah,
That's it.
Our control room looked up the answer to that question. What was the number one reason out of the 40 about why you shouldn't have children? Kids are a silly idea. That was number one. Kids are a silly idea. Okay, Betsey, let me go to you with this. According to the World Health Organization, depression is now the second most debilitating disease for women after heart disease. How do we get women to stop worrying so much?
I don't know. And I will say that I find the depression data very confusing because suicide has actually gone down for women. So suicide rose for women in the 50s and 60s and started falling in the early 70s and fell through the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And in fact, we do see a decline in male suicide that comes with the introduction of those the antidepressants that were introduced in the late 80s, like Prozac. But you don't actually see that any pattern in the data for women that indicates that there was a decline in their suicidality. But of course, they are much less likely to commit suicide than men, and their suicide rates have been declining, as I said, since the 70s. And yet, women take twice as many antidepressants as men do. So I find those things hard to put together.
Kathy, in your cohort, do you notice a great deal of worrying among your colleagues?
Yeah, I would say so. And again, I think it goes back to the raised expectations of every level of your life. I mean, we all say we're doing everything badly instead of one thing very well at a time. So I think that there's always worrying about if I'm holding up one side, I'm letting something else drop.
Also, though, children's safety. I think once you've had children, you can't, in some respects, when they're out of your sight, you almost always worry about something because you want to make sure they're okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not of the overprotective sort at all, but I do have a lot of friends that are very overprotective, and I think that, we're meant to say, don't send your children out alone until they're about, 18. They're not allowed to walk down to the park by themselves. That puts a lot of pressure on you because if you are the type of parent who would allow that, if something should happen, then you'd be labeled a bad parent. So I think you can't win in either case with that sort of thing.
Peggy, how do you get women to stop worrying so much?
Well, that's another, I was just going to say that's a great point because that's another way in which we have, I know in the media and socially we've raised anxiety levels to such a high height that, nobody's safe anymore. How do we get women to stop worrying? I don't know. Martinis at 6.
Beer in a ball game.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anne, you got a theory on this?
Well, I think that we can make a choice. I mean, one of the advantages of having lived through, the last or, being part of a generation that's at the other side of this is that we can choose not to have the Martha Stewart home. We can choose to say no to certain expectations. We can, we don't have to cleave to some, ridiculous advertising standard that's put forth. I really do believe that. And I do think that there is a incipient backlash. I certainly feel it around me, and it's not just the function of the economy. I think that we are trying to figure something else out.
Yeah, and I would agree. I'd agree that we have the choice not to do that. And I have chosen, my house is not anything out of Martha Stewart. I could care less what color the walls in my house are, what type of furniture I have. And I've discovered that that's okay. You can do that and you still have friends and you still have a good one. People will actually still come and visit me at my home if my kids aren't there. So, it's okay. You can actually make that choice. But I think a lot of women are afraid to make that choice, to let the standards slip, so to speak.
Don't you get competitive about these things, though? When your friends come over, you do. I mean, come on, let's face it.
I give them martinis, and they don't care. Yeah.
Come on, let's even with martinis at 6.
Well,
when you have friends over, you want to show.
What I do is I joke. I only invite people over who have children already, and I let the kids run in first. So anything that's messed up, I can blame on them.
Got it. Martinis at 6. Eh? That's really
That's
the
my
solution.
Martinis at 6.
Okay, Betsey, a bit of an existential question here. Do we place too much significance on happiness?
I think that's a really good question. In thinking about the whole relationship between kids and happiness, one of the things I was left to conclude is that happiness perhaps doesn't measure everything in a life. And there's certainly there are more people who tell me that they would not go back and not have had children than makes sense given the data that suggests that people with kids are less happy. And so there might be something that's broader about fulfillment or the richness of life that's just not captured by these subjective well-being questions.
And does that suggest a little more suffering is not such a terrible thing?
Well, I come from, the Irish stock, so the blood of Irish martyrs runs through my veins. I think suffering is not a bad thing at all. So I think that, and I don't think that happiness is necessarily the be-all and end-all of an existence. It's a transit, it's an elusive and transitory state, and we should, when it occurs, treasure it, but certainly not see it as a life goal. I think there are far more important things to live for than that.
Peggy, you buying into the richness of a life filled with suffering?
Well, I think often we don't know that we only know in retrospect when we've been happy. I think we can say that about many things. But yeah, I think happiness is perhaps highly overrated. It's part of our whole Western idea of personal self-fulfillment.
Happiness is highly overrated.
Maybe, yes. I think
Really?
it may be overrated.
I thought that was the point of life. No?
Only these days.
Only
in this culture. In this culture it is. But there are other cultures and
Well,
other ways of feeling fulfilled.
Happiness is an overrated virtue, Kathy. What do you think?
I think it's an undefined virtue, more or less, more than an overrated one. I think if you ask anybody, how are you doing? I'm busy. Everybody's busy, and busy seems to be associated with not being happy, or there's something wrong with being busy. I love being busy. So for me, I'm busy is I'm great. For most people, or a lot of people, I'm busy means that they're really suffering through things. So I think I agree that you don't realize that you're happy until it's over, the good old days, so to speak. But it doesn't necessarily mean, that we're overrating it or overvaluing it. We're not recognizing it when it happens sometimes. That being busy with all your kids or running around doing all stuff, that's actually a state of happiness. Or why do you keep doing it? I had 4 kids. I must have liked the first one enough.
Well, I hope the last 57 minutes of your life was somewhat
Happy?
happy anyway, and I'm grateful to all 4 of you for coming on the program to discuss this tonight. Betsey Stevenson of the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, thanks for joining us on the line from Philly. It's good to have you on the program tonight. And again, congratulations on becoming a mother just 3 weeks ago. And yes, after we're finished, you get to go home and go to bed. Thank you.
Good night. It's great talking with you.
Ann Kingston from Maclean's Magazine, Margaret Wente of the Globe and Mail, Kathy Buckworth, author of The Blackberry Diaries. Thanks so much to the 3 of you for being here as well.
Thank you.
Now, for more information about tonight's guests and to read Betsey Stevenson and Justin Wolfer's study called The Paradox of Declining Female Happiness, please visit us online at tvo.org/theagenda. Tonight's program was produced by your agenda producer, Navin Vaswani, and Mike Miner. And you can read Navin's post entitled, How Happy Are You? On our Inside Agenda Producers blog on our website at tvo.org/theagenda.